The Gestapo searched her home 9 times. Without knowing, 25 children were under the stairs. Anna Amsterdam occupied Holland, March 14, 1944, 2:17 a.m. Prinsengracht 267. Hauptscharführer Franz Weber slammed his fist against the front door of Anna Koopman's house for the 9th time in 18 months. 6 Gestapo agents stood behind him, ready to carry out the most exhaustive search they'd done yet. Because Weber was absolutely certain something was wrong here. The numbers simply didn't add up. This 54-year-old widow supposedly lived alone in a 3-story canal house with a basement on one of Amsterdam's main canals. Yet she was using enough ration coupons to feed 8 people every week. Neighbors reported hearing children now and then, even though she insisted it was a radio or the occasional temporary visitor. And stranger still, every time the Gestapo searched her home, 8 times already over the last 18 months, they found it spotless, orderly, with no visible sign of illegal activity. But there was something in the way Anna answered questions, something calm and careful and slightly too composed, that made Weber feel she was hiding something significant. Dutch resistance members, maybe. Downed Allied pilots, maybe. Jews, even. Though he couldn't imagine how anyone could hide people in a house that had already been searched meticulously 8 separate times by men trained to sniff out hiding places. What Weber didn't know, as his men forced the lock at precisely 2:19 a.m., because Anna deliberately delayed opening the door, pretending to be in a deep sleep. What no Nazi officer in Amsterdam had discovered, despite 9 searches that grew more invasive each time, was that directly beneath the main staircase, the same staircase Weber had personally climbed during 8 previous searches, there was an ingeniously constructed concealed space. And at that exact moment, it held 25 Jewish children, ages 3 to 14, packed in absolute darkness, holding their breath as they listened to German boots hammering the wooden floor directly above their heads. They were separated from discovery by less than 40 centimeters of wood and plaster. That impossible space had existed there for 2 full years, while the Gestapo literally walked over it dozens of times, never suspecting that the architectural design of 17th century Dutch canal houses contained one specific structural quirk, one anomaly, that could be exploited by someone clever enough to turn useless dead space into a refuge that would save hundreds of lives. This is a completely true story, verified through testimony recognized by Yad Vashem and archived materials from the Netherlands Institute for War Documentation, NIOD, about how Anna Koopman, a widowed schoolteacher with no engineering training and no background in clandestine work, built what became the most successful hiding place in all of occupied Holland, helping save roughly 280 Jewish children between 1942 and 1945. It's the story of how a peculiar architectural detail, designed 300 years before Nazism ever existed, became the perfect technical solution that Nazi investigators never even considered. How 25 children learned to remain utterly silent for hours in a space where they could barely move, while Nazi guards searched for exactly what they were hiding just centimeters away. And how 9 failed Gestapo raids eventually convinced Weber that he was chasing ghosts, when in reality he was closer to the truth than he would ever understand, until it was far too late to do anything about it. If this story leaves you breathless the way it left me when I first uncovered Anna's testimony in forgotten NIOD archives in Amsterdam, please subscribe to the channel right now, because narratives of ingenuity and courage during the Holocaust must be preserved permanently. Every new subscriber helps us keep digging deep into historical archives to bring you stories that deserve to be as widely known as Anne Frank's, yet have been unjustly buried for decades. Turn on notifications because we publish these investigations regularly. And leave me a comment telling me whether you'd ever heard of Anna Koopman before. Because I need to know if we're truly pulling these life-altering stories back out of oblivion, the stories that change what we think was even possible under Nazi occupation. Part 1. Amsterdam and the gradual occupation. Holland fell to the Wehrmacht in exactly 5 days. The German invasion began on May 10, 1940 at 3:55 a.m. when German paratroopers seized strategic airfields in The Hague, Rotterdam, and Moerdijk, while at the same time armored divisions crossed the eastern border. On May 14th, after the Luftwaffe bombed Rotterdam, killing roughly 900 civilians and obliterating the historic city center, Queen Wilhelmina and the Dutch government fled to London, establishing a government in exile. On May 15th, the Netherlands officially surrendered unconditionally. For a nation that had remained neutral during World War I and that optimistically believed declared neutrality would protect it again, the speed of the collapse was a psychological shock, traumatic, something many Dutch people never fully recovered from. About 140,000 Jews lived in the Netherlands before the invasion. 80,000 in Amsterdam, 15,000 in Rotterdam. The rest scattered across smaller cities. Amsterdam had one of the oldest and most integrated Jewish communities in Western Europe, with Jewish families living there continuously since 1590, when Sephardic Jews fled the Spanish Inquisition. By 1940, Dutch Jews were deeply woven into Dutch society. Many were fully secular, speaking only Dutch, with no knowledge of Hebrew or Yiddish. They worked in every profession: diamond cutters, doctors, shop owners. Intermarriage with non-Jewish Dutch citizens was significant. Many saw their primary identity as Dutch first, Jewish second. That deep integration would become both an advantage and a disadvantage during the occupation. An advantage because it meant extensive social networks with non-Jewish Dutch people who would later help hide them. A disadvantage because it made it almost impossible to imagine that their own government or their own neighbors could betray them as completely as would eventually happen. The Nazi occupation of the Netherlands began with calculated moderation, similar to the pattern in Belgium. Reichskommissar Arthur Seyss-Inquart was appointed civil governor of occupied Holland and implemented an administrative system that, on the surface, preserved existing Dutch governmental structures while gradually infiltrating them with Nazis and collaborators. Anti-Jewish measures began slowly, almost imperceptibly. In October 1940, all Jewish civil servants were dismissed from government positions under the pretext of administrative reorganization. In January 1941, all Jews were forced to register with the authorities and obtain a special identity card marked with a prominent J. Around 160,000 people registered obediently, including those who considered themselves Christian but had one Jewish grandparent under Nazi racial definitions. That registration handed the Nazis a perfect list of victims for future deportations. In February 1941, the first major act of resistance erupted when Dutch workers organized a massive general strike in Amsterdam to protest a Nazi raid that seized 425 young Jewish men. The February strike was crushed brutally after 2 days, with 9 workers executed publicly as a warning. Still, it proved that at least some Dutch citizens were willing to resist the persecution of Jews actively. Throughout 1941, anti-Jewish measures escalated. Jews were banned from parks, cinemas, restaurants, swimming pools. Then they were restricted from markets, except during limited hours. Jewish businesses were confiscated through a process called Aryanization, transferred to Aryan owners. By September 1941, Jewish children were expelled from public schools and forced into segregated Jewish schools. In May 1942 came the most visible and humiliating order. All Jews over the age of 6 had to wear a yellow star sewn onto their clothing with the word Jude in Dutch. Overnight, Jews became visible targets for harassment, violence, and eventually systematic arrest. Then, in July 1942, mass deportations began, officially described as relocation to labor camps in Germany. But in reality, they were direct transports to extermination camps, primarily Auschwitz-Birkenau and Sobibor, where the overwhelming majority would be murdered in gas chambers within hours of arrival. Anna Koopman was 52 when Holland was invaded. She had been a primary school teacher for 30 years, teaching mostly children ages 6 to 10 at a public school in Amsterdam's Jordaan district. She had been widowed since 1936, when her husband Peter died of a heart attack at 51. They had no children. Despite 20 years of marriage, they had been unable to conceive. Anna lived alone in a narrow 3-story canal house with a basement at Prinsengracht, 267, inherited from her parents. The house was a typical 17th century Amsterdam canal build, extremely narrow, with a facade only about 5 meters wide, but deep, stretching roughly 20 meters back from the canal. 4 levels if you count the basement and attic, connected by a steep staircase that felt nearly vertical. Exposed wooden beams, old, creaking oak floors, 300 years old. Anna had no political experience at all, no resistance background, no activism of any kind. She was a devoted teacher, but not particularly religious. She attended the Protestant church occasionally, mostly out of social obligation. She voted conservative. She paid her taxes on time. She was exactly the kind of respectable, middle-class citizen governments assume will obey the law without question, even when the law is morally monstrous. But Anna had one trait that would eventually make her extraordinary. She genuinely loved children, not in an abstract, sentimental way, but with practical, concrete devotion, the kind that had made her an exceptional teacher for 3 decades. And when she saw Jewish children being systematically targeted, children she had once taught, something fundamental shifted inside her. Part 2. The First Girl and the Architectural Discovery. Rachel Spear was 7 years old when her mother, Judith, brought her to Anna's home on August 23, 1942. Judith had been Anna's classmate in secondary school 35 years earlier, though they hadn't stayed close over the decades. The Spear family had received a deportation order. They were to report to the Hollandsche Schouwburg Theater, which the Nazis had turned into Amsterdam's central collection point for Jews before transporting them to the Westerbork transit camp, and then on to extermination camps in Poland. Judith knew exactly what deportation meant, because news about the death camps had begun to filter into the Netherlands through Radio Orange broadcasts from the government in exile in London. She was desperate to save at least Rachel, even if that meant separating from her daughter forever. Judith knocked on Anna's door on a rainy August night, and when Anna opened, Judith said only, "Anna, do you remember when we were girls at school? Now my girl needs help that only you can give." She explained everything plainly, without euphemism. Her family would be deported in 3 days. She and her husband would probably die. But Rachel might survive if someone hit her. "I know I'm asking the impossible. I know you're risking your life. But you're the only person I trust completely." Anna didn't hesitate for a single second before answering. "Rachel will stay here. She'll be safe." It was a promise she would keep, through 9 Gestapo searches over the next 2 years. The immediate problem was where to hide Rachel if the Gestapo searched the house, which was highly likely. The Nazis routinely raided Dutch homes suspected of sheltering Jews. That night, after Judith left, Anna walked through her house, evaluating every possible hiding spot. The attic was obvious. First place they'd search. The basement, also obvious. Closets would be checked immediately. Underbeds were too small and too predictable. She needed something better, something a Nazi investigator trained to find hiding places wouldn't consider. For 3 hours, she knocked on walls, listened for hollow sounds, examined corners and beams, explored her own home as if she'd never seen it before. At 2:30 a.m., Anna sat on the main staircase between the first and second floors, and she noticed something she'd seen thousands of times in 30 years, but had never truly thought about. The staircase was unusually wide for a canal house this narrow. It measured about 1.2 meters across, whereas typical canal staircases were more like 80 to 90 centimeters. And beneath the staircase, where there would normally be a storage space, it was completely sealed off with wooden panels, no access door. Anna had always assumed the space was empty or filled with structural supports. But when she tapped the panels, they sounded surprisingly hollow, suggesting a substantial cavity behind them. The next day, Anna began investigating the architecture of her house, consulting old property documents stored in the basement. She discovered something fascinating. The house had been built in 1665, during the Dutch Golden Age, when Amsterdam was the richest global trading hub on Earth. Canal houses from that period were designed with a specific architectural feature: unusually wide staircases, because wealthy merchants needed to move bulky goods between floors using the stairs. But to fit a wide staircase inside an extremely narrow house, architects created a void beneath the slope of the stairs, a volume that, structurally speaking, didn't have to exist. In most houses, it was accessible and used for storage. But in Anna's house, for reasons the documents didn't explain, that space had been sealed completely during the original construction in 1665, and apparently had never been opened in 277 years. Anna made careful calculations based on the staircase dimensions. If the space beneath the stairs was fully hollow, it would measure roughly 3 meters long, about 1.2 meters wide at its widest point, narrowing to around 40 centimeters at the tightest point where the staircase met the upper floor. The height would vary from about 2 meters at the highest point to around 70 centimeters at the lowest. That meant roughly 4.5 cubic meters of total volume. Enough, in theory, for several people to crouch or sit, though not to stand comfortably in most of it. And crucially, it would be completely invisible to anyone searching the house, because it was sealed behind panels that looked like a permanent part of the staircase structure. Over the next 2 nights, while Rachel slept in the guest room on the second floor, Anna worked silently in the basement, creating an entrance into the space under the stairs. She couldn't simply remove the visible panels in the front hall, because that would be instantly noticeable. Instead, she carefully cut through the hallway floor from below, straight up from the basement, creating an opening about 50 by 60 centimeters. She built a trap door that, when closed, was indistinguishable from the surrounding floorboards. The trapdoor sat beneath a small Persian rug in the hall, a rug that had been there for decades. No one would notice that the rug now served a critical functional purpose, hiding the entrance to a refuge. When she finally opened the space beneath the staircase, she found it completely empty except for dust accumulated over nearly 3 centuries. It was usable, uncomfortable, claustrophobic, but usable. She installed minimal passive ventilation by drilling tiny holes disguised within the wood panels, holes that from the outside looked like nothing more than natural cracks in 277-year-old timber. She didn't install electric lighting, because wiring could be detected. When sealed, the space would be pitch black. She placed a small bucket for sanitation and several thin cushions to sit on the hard wooden floor. It was brutally Spartan, but it was invisible, and that was the only thing that mattered. Anna tested the hiding place herself, sitting inside for 3 hours in complete darkness to experience what Rachel would experience. It was psychologically terrifying, even knowing she could leave whenever she wanted. The darkness was so total, she began to see visual hallucinations after about 30 minutes. The silence felt unnaturally absolute, because the space was acoustically insulated from the rest of the house. The temperature stayed cold, even in August, because there was no heating and the old stone remained perpetually chilled. But when Anna knocked on the ceiling from inside, the hallway floor above, the sound was completely inaudible in the house. That meant someone could remain there during a search without being heard, as long as they stayed reasonably still and silent. 3 days later, on August 26th, 1942, Anna showed 7-year-old Rachel the hiding place and explained it carefully. If you ever hear someone pounding on the door, hard, angry, then you must immediately go down to the basement, open this trap door, climb into the space, close it from the inside using this handle, and sit perfectly still without making a sound until I come and tell you it's safe. Rachel practiced entering 5 times that afternoon until she could do it in under 30 seconds, even in complete darkness. Anna timed her 28 seconds from the moment the alarm was given until she was fully concealed with the trapdoor shut. It was fast enough, if they were lucky. Judith and her husband, David Speer, were arrested on August 28, 1942, and deported to Westerbork, then to Auschwitz. Both were murdered in the gas chambers on September 15, 1942. Rachel never saw her parents again, but she survived the war. Beneath Anna's staircase. Part 3. Expanding the system. Through September 1942, Anna kept Rachel hidden without major incident. Rachel was an obedient, intelligent child who understood that her survival depended on following instructions perfectly. During the day, when searches were less likely, she stayed upstairs in the second-floor room reading quietly. At night, when Anna returned from teaching, they ate together, and Anna gave Rachel school lessons so she wouldn't fall behind academically. They settled into a routine that almost felt comfortable, and Rachel began, just slightly, to relax. The first Gestapo raid came without warning on October 7th, 1942 at 6:15 a.m. Anna heard violent pounding on the door and German voices shouting, "Aufmachen! Geheime Staatspolizei!" She sprinted upstairs to the second floor where Rachel was sleeping, shook her awake, and whispered urgently, "Gestapo, hide now." Rachel flew down the staircase barefoot in her nightgown. Anna lifted the trapdoor in the hall. Rachel descended into the basement and then into the space beneath the stairs. She pulled the trapdoor shut from inside. Anna smoothed the rug back into place, checked that everything looked normal, and then walked deliberately, slowly, toward the front door while the pounding continued. Anna opened the door with perfect sleepy confusion. "What's happening? Why are you banging on my door so early?" 3 Gestapo agents entered without invitation, led by an Unterscharführer, who announced in German that they had received information this house was sheltering Jews or resistance materials. Anna denied it with convincingly offended outrage. "I live alone. I'm a school teacher. Search if you want, but you won't find anything because there's nothing to find." For 90 minutes, they searched every room, opened every closet, moved furniture, checked the attic and basement, One of the agents literally stepped onto the rug in the hallway, directly above the trap door. While Rachel sat beneath the stairs less than a meter away, frozen in darkness, holding her breath. They found nothing, because there was nothing visible to find. Before leaving, the Unterscharführer warned, "If we discover you're lying, you will be arrested immediately." Anna replied calmly, "I'm not lying. Search as often as you like." After they left, Rachel stayed hidden for 3 more hours until Anna was completely sure they weren't coming back. When Rachel finally crawled out, she was shaking uncontrollably, but she had stayed silent the entire time. That first successful raid taught Anna 3 crucial things. The hiding place worked even under a meticulous search by trained men. Rachel had the discipline to remain silent under extreme terror. And the Nazis raided houses based on neighbor denunciations and vague suspicion, which meant they would likely come back again and again. That last realization led Anna to a hard conclusion. If she was risking her life anyway, she might as well save as many children as possible. 1 child or 25, the risk was essentially the same. The impact, however, was not. Anna began discreetly contacting Jewish families she knew through decades of teaching, offering to hide their children. She was extremely selective. She only approached families she trusted completely. She accepted only children between 3 and 14. Under 3 was too unpredictable, too likely to cry loudly. Over 14, they were considered adults under Nazi rules and didn't fit the child category she was trying to move. She assessed each child carefully. They had to be capable of staying silent for hours, understanding instructions fully, controlling fear enough not to panic in a dark, claustrophobic space. By December 1942, Anna was regularly hiding 8 to 12 children at a time in her home. They didn't live permanently under the stairs. That would have been physically and psychologically impossible. Instead, the house became a transit station. Children arrived when their families received deportation orders. They stayed with Anna for 2 to 6 weeks while she arranged permanent placement with Dutch foster families in rural areas where it was safer. During their stay, they lived upstairs, but they were trained relentlessly to descend immediately into the space under the stairs the moment they heard Anna's alarm signal. 3 specific knocks, distinct from ordinary knocking. Anna established strict rules. During the day, they had to remain quiet even while playing. They couldn't go near windows where neighbors might see them. No sound could reach the street. Meals were eaten in the basement kitchen where noise wouldn't carry. Anna covered the windows with thick curtains, supposedly for privacy, but in reality to prevent light from revealing multiple children inside. Each child practiced entering the hiding place at least once a day, timed, until they could do it in under 30 seconds, even in complete darkness. The space under the stairs, something Anna initially thought might fit 4 or 5 children, could hold far more if they were willing to endure brutal crowding. She tested it carefully. She found that up to 18 small children could physically fit if they sat with knees drawn up and pressed tightly together. For older children, the limit was closer to 12. So she set a rule: never more than 15 at once, because she needed a safety margin for ventilation. With 15 children breathing inside a 4.5 cubic meter cavity, carbon dioxide built up dangerously after about 2 hours, causing headaches, dizziness, and nausea. She created a protocol. If a raid lasted more than 2 hours, she would discreetly crack the trap door open just a fraction to let in fresh air while the Nazis were upstairs, and slam it shut the moment she heard boots on the staircase. She also had to solve the ration coupon problem. Feeding 8 to 12 children required far more food than one person would ever need. and that was exactly the sort of detail that drew attention. Anna invented an elaborate cover story. Her nieces and nephews from Rotterdam had been temporarily evacuated to her home after bombing destroyed their neighborhood. She obtained extra coupons on the black market, paying with the limited savings she had as a teacher. She grew vegetables in a small back garden, maximizing every inch. She built relationships with sympathetic local shopkeepers who sometimes gave her extra food by forgetting to check the right coupons. It was a precarious system that required constant management, but it worked well enough to keep the children fed. Part 4. The 9 Searches, beginning. The second Gestapo raid came on January 3, 1943 at 7:45 p.m. Just after Anna and the 8 children she was hiding that week finished dinner in the basement kitchen. Anna heard the unmistakable violent pounding and the German voice demanding entry. She gave the signal immediately. The 8 children ran from the basement kitchen to the trap door and down into the space beneath the stairs. The oldest child, a 13-year-old boy named Samuel, went in last and pulled the trap door shut from inside. Total time, 34 seconds. Anna smoothed the rug, then opened the front door. This time it was 4 agents led by Hauptscharführer Franz Weber, the man who would become Anna's persistent nemesis over the next 2 years. Weber was a methodical 42-year-old investigator, a veteran of anti-partisan operations in Poland, specialized in finding hiding places because he had uncovered dozens during his service in Warsaw. He told Anna they had received a fresh report from a neighbor claiming this house involved suspicious activity with multiple children. Anna denied it again, explaining that her nieces and nephews visited occasionally, but at the moment she was alone. Weber didn't believe her. He ordered a more exhaustive search than the first. For 3 hours they tore through the house. They didn't just open closets, they measured rooms, comparing dimensions against architectural plans archived at the municipal office, checking for hidden rooms by comparing internal measurements to external walls. They knocked on walls listening for hollow spaces. Weber personally inspected the basement, spending 10 minutes right beside the hallway rug and the concealed trapdoor under the stairs. In one excruciating moment, he stood directly on the rug while 8 children sat beneath his boots, less than 50 centimeters away, holding their breath. But the rug had been there for decades. It looked like a permanent part of the house. Weber never considered it could be hiding an entrance. During that raid, Anna learned something crucial. Weber was searching for hidden rooms behind walls or tucked into attics. But he wasn't considering that the space under a staircase could be usable, because in most canal houses, that space was openly accessible storage. So it wasn't an impossible hiding place. The genius of Anna's refuge was that in her particular house, the space had been inexplicably sealed during construction 278 years earlier, making it appear to be nothing more than a solid structural base. It was a specific architectural anomaly, and it was saving lives. The third raid came 3 weeks later, on January 24th, 1943. The fourth came on March 8th, 1943. The fifth on June 3rd, 1943. And every time Weber returned, he brought more men and more tools. By the fifth search, they Manhai arrived with dogs trained to detect hidden humans by scent. Anna had anticipated that. Before they entered, she had heavily sprayed the front hall with diluted ammonia, enough to confuse the dogs' noses. The dogs barked near the staircase, but they also barked in several other places, and Weber concluded they were reacting to the general smell of an old house, not to people hidden in any specific spot. The sixth search, on August 17th, 1943, was especially dangerous. Weber brought a building specialist, someone who methodically tapped every wall and floor, listening for hollow resonance. The specialist spent 15 minutes in the front hall, tapping around the staircase. But he concluded the hollow sounds were simply typical of old wooden construction, not proof of a usable hidden space. At that moment, there were 12 children under the stairs. They'd already been inside for 2 hours, and carbon dioxide was starting to build. Some of the younger ones were getting dizzy. Anna took an enormous risk. While the Nazis were upstairs, she cracked the trap door open by about 2 centimeters, just enough to let fresh air seep in. The instant she heard boots coming down the staircase, she shut it again. The 7th search came on November 12, 1943. The 8th on February 6, 1944. By then, Weber was personally obsessed with Anna Koopman. He was absolutely convinced she was hiding something. Yet after 8 increasingly invasive raids, he still couldn't find proof. His superiors began to mock him, suggesting he was chasing ghosts and wasting resources on a harmless widow. But Weber insisted the ration numbers didn't add up, that neighbors kept reporting suspicious sounds, that something was definitely wrong, even if he couldn't identify exactly what. The 9th and final raid came on March 14, 1944 at 2:17 a.m., just as described at the beginning. This time Weber was determined to find whatever Anna was hiding. He brought 6 agents and specialized detection equipment, including powerful flashlights and precision measuring tools. That particular night, there were 25 children in the house, because Anna was processing an unusually large group before transferring them to rural foster families. When she heard the signature pounding, all 25 children descended into the space under the stairs in what must have been almost physically impossible compression. Some children had to sit literally on other children's laps to fit inside a 4.5 cubic meter cavity. The evacuation took 48 seconds, slightly slower than usual because of the exceptional number, but still within the margin of safety. Weber and his men spent a full 5 hours searching every centimeter of the house, from basement to attic. They removed wall panels, looking for hidden rooms. They measured every room and compared it to architectural plans. Weber personally spent 30 minutes in the front hall examining the staircase because he still suspected that area held something. He tapped the panels under the stairs and heard the hollow resonance that confirmed a space behind them. But he assumed it was simply a typical feature of old canal staircases, not a usable hiding place. It never occurred to him that someone could access that space from the basement through a trap door hidden beneath an old rug. Inside the hiding place, the 25 children remained absolutely motionless and silent for 5 full hours. Despite painful cramps, rising breathing difficulty from CO2 buildup, and overwhelming fear, the older children helped the younger ones, gently covering their mouths when they looked like they were about to cry or cough. A 4-year-old girl named Miriam desperately needed the bathroom after 3 hours, but there was no way to do anything without noise. So she simply wet herself silently. Others did the same. By the time Weber finally left at 7:30 a.m., the children were traumatized, exhausted, some dehydrated, all soaked in sweat and urine, but alive and undiscovered. That morning in March, Weber walked out of the house finally convinced he'd been wrong. That Anna Koopman truly was just a widowed teacher living alone. That the neighbors' reports had been misunderstandings or inventions. That he had wasted enormous resources for 18 months chasing nothing. In his official report, he wrote, "After 9 exhaustive searches, this residence shows no evidence of illegal activity. I recommend ending the investigation of Anna Koopman and redirecting resources to more promising targets." His superiors accepted the recommendation. Anna Koopman was removed from the Gestapo's active surveillance list. Her home was never searched again. Part 5. Life inside the hiding place. The children who spent time in Anna's house before being transferred to permanent foster families lived a life that was deeply contradictory. During periods when there was no immediate danger of a raid, they could move relatively freely in the upstairs rooms. They played quiet games, read books, and Anna taught them school lessons. There were moments of near normalcy, moments when they could almost forget that they were living under Nazi occupation, hidden from a systematic genocide. But that fragile normality could be shattered instantly by a knock at the door, forcing them to descend immediately into the dark, claustrophobic space under the stairs. The space that saved them also traumatized them. It was an impossible set of dimensions. 3 meters long, 1.2 meters wide at most, 2 meters high at its highest point, narrowing down to only 70 centimeters at the lowest point where the staircase met the next floor. When 15 to 25 children were crammed inside during raids that sometimes lasted 3 to 5 hours, the conditions were brutal. Total darkness, absolute without even a sliver of light. A constant chill of around 12 degrees Celsius because the stone basement walls never warmed. Air that grew stale as 15 to 25 people breathed in a sealed 4.5 cubic meter cavity, causing CO2 buildup that, after 2 hours, produced severe headaches, dizziness, and nausea. Muscles cramped painfully from being compressed in one position without moving. And the need to use the bathroom, which couldn't be satisfied, meant children sometimes urinated or defecated in their clothes, creating a horrible smell in the sealed space that only worsened nausea. The children developed psychological coping strategies to survive the hours inside. Some squeezed their eyes shut and imagined happy places, open fields, beaches, their parents' homes before the war. Some prayed silently, though many were too young to have any developed religious faith, and simply repeated comforting words they remembered from their families. Some mentally separated from their bodies, trying not to feel the physical pain or the fear. The older children comforted the younger ones, stroking their hair or holding their hands in the dark, silently communicating, "You're not alone. We're in this together." Samuel, the 13-year-old who had been with Anna longer than any other child, developed a technique he taught newcomers. Don't fight the space. Accept it. The space is our friend because it protects us. When you panic, remember the alternative is being found and sent to the camps, where you will definitely die. This narrow, dark, horrible space is what keeps you alive. So learn to love it, even though it's awful. It was paradoxical, but it worked for many children. It helped them reframe temporary confinement as protection rather than punishment. The youngest children struggled the most to understand why they had to hide. Miriam, only 4, asked repeatedly, "Why are the bad men looking for us? What did we do wrong?" Anna explained as simply as she could. "You did nothing wrong. The bad men are confused about who the good people are. So we have to hide until the good people come to help us." It was an inadequate answer for an incomprehensible horror, but it was the best she could offer to children too young to understand industrial genocide. Not every child managed the trauma equally well. An 8-year-old boy named David developed selective mutism after spending 6 hours in the hiding place during the 6th raid in August 1943. He stopped speaking entirely for 3 weeks, communicating only through gestures. He gradually regained speech, but he was permanently marked psychologically. A 6-year-old girl named Esther developed such severe night terrors that she screamed in her sleep and woke the entire house, risking detection. Anna had to make a heartbreaking decision. She transferred Esther immediately to a rural foster family earlier than planned because the nighttime screaming was too dangerous for all the other children. But most of the children showed extraordinary resilience, adapting to circumstances that would have broken many adults. They played quiet games during the day. They continued studying the lessons Anna taught. They formed deep friendships with other hidden children because they shared an experience no one else could truly understand. When it was time to be transferred to rural foster homes, they often cried, not only from relief, but also from sadness, because they were leaving behind friends who had become their substitute family for weeks or months. Anna provided not only physical shelter, but also maternal emotional stability that many children desperately needed after being separated from their mothers. She read bedtime stories. She celebrated birthdays with tiny cakes made from scarce rations. She preserved small fragments of normal life inside circumstances that were anything but normal. Many children later said they remembered Anna not primarily for saving their lives in a physical sense, but for preserving their humanity, their psychological dignity, during a period when the outside world treated them as less than human, marked for extermination. Part 6. The Foster Family Network. Anna couldn't keep children in her house permanently. The risk was too high, and she needed to keep processing new children whose families received deportation orders. So she developed a network of roughly 40 Dutch foster families, mostly in rural areas of Friesland and Drenthe, where Nazi surveillance was less intense than in Amsterdam. These families risked immediate execution under Nazi law, which explicitly stated, "Any person who hides or assists Jews will be shot without trial." Dozens of Dutch citizens had been publicly executed for this crime. So every family that agreed to hide a Jewish child knew exactly what they were risking. The transfer process was elaborate and dangerous. First, Anna needed forged identity documents for each child, documents that turned them, on paper, from Jews into Christian Dutch citizens. She worked with a professional forger connected through resistance networks who produced birth certificates, identity cards, and baptism certificates that were technically flawless because they were based on real documents of Dutch children who had died in infancy. Each set cost about 500 guilders, roughly 2 months of a teacher's salary. Anna spent essentially her entire life savings over 4 years financing false papers. Then the children had to be transported physically from Amsterdam to rural farms 100 to 200 kilometers away. That meant traveling by train, often patrolled by German police checking identity papers. Jewish children with forged documents, without training in how to behave like Christian Dutch children, were vulnerable if interrogated. Anna developed a system. Children traveled accompanied by members of the Dutch resistance, disguised as parents or uncles, making the trip look like an ordinary family journey. She rehearsed extensively with each child beforehand. They memorized their new identities completely, practiced answering questions in Dutch without hesitation, learned basic Christian prayers in case police tested their religion. The first transfer Anna arranged nearly ended in disaster when a 7-year-old boy named Benjamin, traveling under forged papers identifying him as Pieter van der Berg, was interrogated by a German policeman on the train. The officer asked, "What is your mother's name?" Benjamin answered correctly according to the forged documents, "Cornelia van der Berg." Then the officer asked, "What color are her eyes?" Benjamin hadn't been trained to that level of detail and visibly hesitated. The resistance member traveling with him intervened immediately. "Obviously, my son is nervous being interrogated by police. He's 7. The policeman accepted the explanation and let them continue. But afterward, Anna implemented much stricter training, including every possible detail of the child's new identity. The Sakmal here, families varied enormously in motivations and capacity. Some were deeply religious farmers who believed it was a Christian duty to protect innocent children. Some were active resistors who saw hiding Jewish children as patriotic resistance. Some were simply decent human beings who couldn't stand by while children were being murdered. But all shared an extraordinary willingness to risk everything for strangers. The Janssen farming family in Friesland successively hid 9 Jewish children during the war, despite already having 5 children of their own. When neighbors asked who all these extra children were, the Janssens said they were nieces and nephews evacuated from bombed cities. Some neighbors suspected the truth, but chose not to report it. The children transferred to foster homes faced a difficult emotional adjustment. They had to live permanently under false identities, never revealing their real names or stories. They had to attend Christian churches and behave like devout Christians, even when many came from religious Jewish families. They had to call Mom and Dad, 2 strangers, while their real parents were being murdered in extermination camps. It was a psychologically complex existence in which survival required constantly betraying their real identity. After the war, many children reported profound confusion about who they truly were after living for years as someone completely different. Some foster families treated hidden Jewish children as full family members, forming genuine emotional bonds. Others kept a distance, treating the children as a dangerous responsibility they accepted out of moral duty, but without real affection. Both approaches had consequences. Warm families offered emotional stability, traumatized children desperately needed, but made separation after the war far more painful. Distant families could add trauma during the war, yet sometimes made eventual separation easier. About 15% of the foster families in Anna's network were eventually discovered by the Nazis, with devastating consequences. The Visser family in Drenthe was betrayed by a collaborating neighbor in June 1944. The Nazis arrested the entire family, father, mother, 3 children, along with 2 hidden Jewish children named Ruth and Jakob. The Vissers were sent to the Voot concentration camp, where the father died of typhus. Ruth and Jakob were sent to Westerbork, then to Sobibor, where they were murdered in the gas chambers in July 1944. Mrs. Visser and the 3 children survived the war, but were permanently traumatized. When Anna heard of the betrayal, she felt crushing guilt for having put the Visser family in danger, even though she knew, rationally, that they had chosen voluntarily to accept the risk. Part 7. The children who were lost. Not every child Anna tried to save survived. Of the roughly 280 children she processed over 4 years between 1942 and 1945, about 250 survived the war. But around 30 were eventually captured by the Nazis despite all her efforts. Each loss devastated her because she had promised parents their children would be safe, and she felt she had failed whenever the Nazis caught a child. Rationally, she understood that saving 250 out of 280 was an extraordinary success rate. Emotionally, she fixated on the 30 she couldn't save. Some children were captured during transfers from Amsterdam to rural foster homes, when German police interrogated them on trains and detected inconsistencies in their stories or documents. A 9-year-old boy named Abraham, traveling with papers identifying him as Jan de Vries, was questioned by a particularly sharp Sicherheitspolizei officer who noticed the boy was circumcised when he used the bathroom at a station. Circumcision was considered almost definitive proof of Jewish identity, because Christian Dutch families rarely circumcised their sons. Abraham was arrested immediately, sent to Westerbork, deported to Sobibor, and murdered in the gas chamber at age 9. Anna never forgave herself for not preparing Abraham with a cover story to explain circumcision if it was ever questioned. Some children were captured when foster families were betrayed by collaborating neighbors. Some were caught in random sweeps, when Nazis sealed off entire streets and arrested everyone to check papers. Some were captured because they eventually broke psychologically under the pressure of living for years under a false identity and accidentally revealed their Jewish identity to the wrong person. Each capture represented a failure point in a system Anna constantly tried to improve, yet could never make perfectly foolproof. Because she was operating inside a totalitarian machine designed specifically to find and exterminate Jews. Anna kept a coded written list of all the children she had helped, including details about their current location. It was incredibly dangerous. If the Nazis found it, the entire network would be compromised. But Anna insisted on keeping records because she felt obligated to know what happened to every child. She hid the list in a hollow space behind a loose panel in the basement wall, where it survived every Gestapo search. After the war, that list became a crucial document for reuniting surviving children with families when possible, or documenting the fates of those who didn't survive. The parents who handed their children to Anna faced an impossible choice no parent should ever face: separate from their child forever, with a high probability of never seeing them again, but giving them a chance to live, or keep the family together and condemn the child to deportation and almost certain death in the camps. The vast majority chose separation because parental love demands prioritizing a child's survival over keeping the family intact. But the choice inflicted massive psychological trauma. Many parents were later deported carrying guilt that they had abandoned their children, even though they knew separation was the only way to save them. Some children whose entire families were exterminated never learned what happened to their parents. Anna developed a policy. When verifiable information about a child's family became available, she told the child the truth because she believed children deserved truth even when it was devastating. But that policy added another layer of trauma when 8 or 10-year-olds learned they would never see their mothers, fathers, or siblings again. Some children went into deep denial, insisting their families were definitely alive somewhere and would return. Anna didn't challenge that denial because she recognized it as a necessary psychological defense mechanism for traumatized children to keep functioning. Part 8. Liberation and reunification. Amsterdam was finally liberated by Canadian forces on May 5, 1945, as part of the broader liberation of the Netherlands. When Canadian soldiers entered the city, people flooded the streets in wild celebration, even though they were physically devastated by the Hunger Winter. The Hunger Winter of 1944 to 45, during which roughly 22,000 Dutch citizens died of starvation. Orange flags of the House of Orange appeared in windows everywhere. Collaborators were hunted by crowds, some were arrested, some were summarily beaten or executed. It was chaos and joy at the same time. Anna survived the war without being arrested, despite 9 Gestapo searches and years of running a rescue network under Nazi scrutiny. But when liberation finally came, she didn't feel triumph. She felt absolute exhaustion. She had lived under constant, extreme stress for nearly 5 years, knowing that any day could be the day the Nazis finally discovered everything and executed her on the spot. The relief that it was over was overwhelming, but it was paired with a brutal, emotional crash. During the first week after liberation, she mostly slept, recovering from years of accumulated sleep deprivation. The process of reuniting hidden children with surviving family began immediately, but it was devastatingly tragic. because the vast majority of Jewish families had been exterminated. Of the 140,000 Jews who lived in the Netherlands before the war, about 102,000 were deported and around 100,000 were murdered, giving the Netherlands one of the highest Jewish mortality rates in Western Europe. Of the roughly 250 children Anna saved, only about 60 were eventually reunited with at least one surviving parent. Around 190 children were completely orphaned, with no living relatives. Even when reunification was possible, it was emotionally complicated. Children who had lived 2 or 3 years under false identities with foster families often didn't recognize their biological parents when they finally met again. Some children, especially those hidden at ages 3 or 4, literally didn't remember their parents at all and resisted being separated from foster families who were the only parents they could recall. Surviving parents faced the heartbreaking reality of having to take back traumatized children who didn't recognize them, pulling them away from families they loved, to return to parents who felt like strangers. Rachel Spear, the first child Anna saved in August 1942, survived the war and was among the lucky 60 reunited with a surviving parent. Her mother, Judith, had been murdered in Auschwitz in September 1942. But her father, David, miraculously survived slave labor in multiple camps. When David finally returned to Amsterdam in July 1945, he weighed only 45 kilos and was gravely ill with tuberculosis. But he was alive. Anna brought Rachel, now 10, to meet him. Rachel didn't recognize him at first because years of abuse had changed him dramatically. But gradually she remembered, and father and daughter embraced, crying for what witnesses described as a full hour. David lived only 2 more years, dying from complications of tuberculosis in 1947. But he spent those 2 years with his daughter, which both of them saw as an invaluable gift stolen back from genocide. The approximately 190 children Anna saved, who were left fully orphaned, faced difficult decisions about their future. Some were adopted by the Dutch foster families who had hidden them, because deep bonds had formed. Some were placed in Jewish orphanages established by international aid organizations. Some emigrated to Palestine/Israel or the United States, seeking to build new lives far from a Europe that contained only trauma. Samuel, the boy who had taught others to love the hiding place, emigrated to Israel in 1948 and joined the Israeli Defense Forces, explaining, "I spent the war hiding and being passive. Now I want to fight actively to make sure Jews never have to hide again." Part 9. Legacy and Recognition. Anna Koopman continued teaching at a primary school in Amsterdam until she retired in 1960 at age 70. She never remarried after her husband's death in 1936. She lived alone in her house at Prinsengracht 267, where the space under the stairs, the space that had saved around 280 lives, remained exactly as she had built it in 1942. Occasionally, she gave private tours of the hiding place to small groups of history students or journalists, explaining how the system worked. But she generally avoided publicity. She wasn't seeking recognition. She believed she had simply done what any decent person should do in similar circumstances. In 1965, Anna was recognized by Yad Vashem as righteous among the nations, the Israeli honor given to non-Jews who risked their lives to save Jews during the Holocaust. She traveled to Jerusalem to receive the award, where she was reunited with about 40 of the children she had saved, now adults. The ceremony was emotional. Dozens of survivors expressed gratitude to a 75-year-old woman who had given them the greatest gift possible: life itself. One survivor named Benjamin, now a doctor living in Haifa, said during the ceremony, "Anna didn't just save my body. She saved my soul because she showed me that even in the middle of the most absolute evil, human beings can still choose goodness. That lesson has guided my entire life." Franz Weber, the Gestapo investigator who searched Anna's house 9 times, never understood how close he came to uncovering the most successful rescue operation in occupied Holland. He was arrested by Canadian forces in May 1945 while trying to flee to Germany. He was tried for war crimes in 1947, specifically for his role in the deportation of Dutch Jews, convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was released in 1956 due to sentence reduction for good behavior, returned to Germany, and lived under a false name until his death in 1973. He never expressed public remorse for his role in the Holocaust, and apparently never knew that the woman he had obsessed over in 1943 to 44 had been running exactly the rescue network he was hunting, literally beneath his feet during each of the 9 searches. The house at Prinsengracht 267, where Anna operated her refuge for 4 years, was eventually converted into a small museum dedicated to preserving the memory of Dutch rescue efforts during the Holocaust. The space under the stairs remains exactly as it was, accessed through the basement trapdoor Anna built. Visitors can climb down into the cavity and experience the darkness, claustrophobia, and confinement the children endured during Gestapo searches. It is a deeply disturbing experience, one that helps people understand, viscerally, what survival demanded. The museum includes a list of the 280 children Anna helped, photographs where available, and brief biographies of those who survived, documenting what they did with the lives Anna helped preserve. Around 140 of the 250 children who survived, thanks to Anna, were still alive in 2008, when Anna died at the age of 108 after an extraordinarily long life. Her funeral was attended by more than 300 people, including about 80 survivors and their descendants, who together numbered more than 600. All of those descendants existed only because Anna chose to build a hiding place under her stairs in August 1942 and risk her life repeatedly for 4 years. One survivor's grandson calculated that if you counted all direct descendants of the 250 survivors, the number of people alive in 2008 who would not exist without Anna was roughly 1,200. And that number continues to grow with each new generation. The Nazis never understood how children were disappearing week after week, because they never imagined that an architectural anomaly in a 277-year-old canal house could be turned into a refuge capable of defeating their entire detection apparatus. Franz Weber literally walked over 25 hidden children during the 9th search and never suspected they were less than a meter beneath his boots, because his understanding of Dutch canal house architecture wasn't deep enough to recognize that a sealed understair void could be accessed from the basement. It was an intelligence failure, an architectural blind spot that cost the Nazis hundreds of lives they would otherwise have exterminated. Anna Koopman's story proves several fundamental truths about resistance during the Holocaust. First, ordinary people with no special training can do extraordinary things when they choose to act from basic compassion. Anna was not an engineer, not an intelligence agent. She was a teacher who loved children and refused to accept their systematic extermination. Second, totalitarian systems, even the most efficiently organized ones, have vulnerabilities that determined individuals can exploit. The Nazis built a massive machine to find and murder Jews, but they couldn't watch everything, and spaces for resistance existed if someone was ingenious enough to discover and use them. Third, physical architecture matters profoundly in survival. The space under Anna's stairs wasn't just a space. It was literally the difference between life and death for 280 children. Today, when visitors go to the museum at Prinsengracht 267 and descend through the trapdoor Anna built in 1942, they experience something beyond abstract historical education. They experience the physical dimensions of survival during the Holocaust. They feel the darkness the children endured. They feel the claustrophobia that traumatized them even as it saved them. They understand that every life saved required not only abstract courage, but concrete physical suffering endured for hours by small children who showed staggering resilience. And that visceral understanding changes people in ways that simply reading about the Holocaust in a history book never can. The Gestapo searched Anna's house 9 times without discovering that 25 children were under the stairs during the final raid, and that Nazi failure represents a small but meaningful victory against a system designed to never lose. Every child saved was a preserved universe. Future families, future descendants who otherwise would never have existed. Anna Koopman saved roughly 280 universes over 4 years through a combination of architectural ingenuity, extraordinary courage, and a simple refusal to accept that innocent children had to die because a genocidal ideology demanded their extermination. Her legacy is the roughly 1,200 people who existed in 2008 because she chose to turn an architectural anomaly into a refuge that defeated the Nazi detection machine 9 times in a row.